Listen, you didn't say we're going to get vulnerable in this podcast. If that's the case, I would have asked for a fee.
Come on, man.
But
Honestly, that coming that coming with a charge.
Yeah, exploiting people's emotions for content, manipulative behaviour. What is going on here?
I'm just asking questions. Symeon Brown, we worked together at Channel 4 News. You've been there now, what, 8 years?
Yeah, man, I've been there a long time.
Yeah, man. Some would say too long.
Too long, man. I'm practically like, you know what I mean?
Testimonial coming up soon.
Listen, I'm going to have my 10 years soon. Listen, I expect to see a gold watch or something, whatever it is that you get.
Nah, you got to do more than 10 years.
As you approach retirement.
You got to do more than 10 years for a gold watch, bro. Come on.
Okay, I'll take silver.
You get a dinner. A nice fancy dinner. Your 8 years at Channel 4 News, you've covered in the main, I would say, social affairs as well as many cultural stories. But what do you think, as a journalist at Channel 4 News, your journalism has impacted? The stuff that you've covered and done, what would you say your work has impacted, and who has it impacted?
It's a very broad question for I don't know, 9 a.m. in the morning.
All right, who are you trying to impact? Probably a better question.
Let me answer a different question.
So, is that how we're starting? Yeah, just dismissing my question and asking yourself your own questions. Is that what you're doing?
I don't know. I would say that at Channel 4 News, I've covered a variety of different things with different slants, with different perspectives, with different kind of outcomes and I guess intentions. So there are pieces which I've covered which were driven by trying to, I guess, capture an injustice, and you want some kind of action or some kind of response. So, for example, I did a piece on a young man who went to a BLM protest, and then he was attacked by some racist far-right protesters. And then he turned to the police whilst bleeding, and then he found himself in cuffs and stopped and searched. And effectively, in addition to highlighting how black people are kind of over-policed as suspects but under-policed as victims, and then trying to get some kind of response in regards to investigating that inequality, that was really the outcome. You're asking the institution, is what you did okay? Does this need to be investigated? Was there a breach of the duties of care that were offered to this teenage boy? So that's a very particular kind of outcome. And from that piece, there was an investigation, so to speak. I did a piece with a producer, a journalist called Zara, and that was on looking at CCTV and how it's used in the criminal justice system recently, and all the concerns that the way that it's currently presented can lead to miscarriages of justice. That's a very clear kind of concern, trying to reconcile a failure in that system. Whilst at the same time, I've done other pieces like I did a piece years ago where I was trying to highlight, I guess, the way that politicians conduct themselves, and to highlight how absurd it is, and then bringing together two, I guess, cultures which are seen as opposed but actually are part of the same thing. So it was taking the quotes that are usually given to Sunday newspapers, the political quotes, which are always historically very gruesome. I'm going to stab this person in their back. They're dead man walk. It's all very violent language. And at the same time, there was all this kind of pearl clutching about drill music and the language being violent. So I said, okay, well, why don't we make a drill song out of these MPs' quotes that they always feed to the Sunday paper, a particular political journalist in particular who will literally put anything on the front cover of his newspaper, any tittle tattle, anything that sounds aggressive. And let's turn it into a drill track. And then you do that, and then you highlight the inequality, you highlight just how, you highlight the level of political discourse in this country. And it was to really say, look how absurd these politicians are about how we accept these norms. And so it's like every piece has a different I guess, trajectory. So when you say, especially to somebody who's generally a generalist, largely covered lots of different things, it's like the intentions and the ambitions and the trajectory differs. But I guess largely you're trying to, well, I'm trying to capture things or report on things which have some kind of meaning and speak to this particular moment in time and tell us something about it.
So why do you think you'd have been able to have covered a lot of those stories in a different newsroom? We work at Channel 4 News. What is it about Channel 4 News that you think enables you or empowers you, if indeed it does those two things, to cover those two types of stories?
Is this podcast being sponsored by Channel 4? It just means I'm trying to fight privatization. What's going on
Not at all. But let's start there. The common denominator between us is Channel 4 News. So
I think that there is a certain format that Channel 4 has that other mainstream news broadcasters don't have. Obviously, it's an hour long. It's still kind of following a magazine-based format, which means more time than certainly BBC One or ITV. And then obviously it has a slightly different public service remit historically, the channel, and therefore the news itself. So I think that in itself gives or allows us a different kind of take. Would I have been able to have given 5-6 minutes to turn MP's quotes into a drill song at BBC News at 6 or News at 10? I would doubt that. They might disagree. So I think that structure of the program enables a slightly different take, the length of the program, specialism, the public service remit. So I think that makes it a kind of a place that gives you maybe a level of agency that is maybe missing in other places. But at the same time, I'd never worked at Sky News. I've never worked at the News at 6, News at 10. So I might go there and say, "Oh my God, this whole time I was living in chains." But I think that's unlikely. But I think that also, it's also about, I guess, the culture of a newsroom as it's led by kind of leadership, and these things can always change. So you never really know for how much longer your particular style or take, how long that lasts for. Things change. The program could be cut to 30 minutes. Could change to 45 minutes. They might want to change up the vibe. You never know. So I don't know. It's an interesting question. But I do think that my interests and the kind of things that I'm interested in pursuing, and even outside of Channel 4 News, I guess in my book as well that is out, I think they're quite particular. And right now I think right now those pursuits and the pursuits that I do at Channel 4 News, there is some kind of alignment between them.
So we'll get to the book in a minute, but as journalists, we all, I guess, have a reason as to why we do what we do. My area is predominantly sport. I'm turned on by sporting moments and sporting excellence, but also how sport can be used for good beyond its arena, but also shine a light where possible on where sport is failing the wider world and where it's not having the impact it should. I enjoy trying to tell those stories, and as well as the great moments of England winning a semi-final in the Euros, but also the kind of more important stuff of, sexual abuse with young girls who were young swimmers and by their coaches, and why that's important and the wider context of that. For you, what is your job as a journalist? What do you see as your role in the field of journalism?
I largely think that my role largely is to tell the truth, but also recognizing that that's the truth as I see it. There's an interesting relationship, right, between facts and truth. Sometimes they're related, sometimes they're not related. In the sense that there is the truth of a thing, right? The idea that's driving it, what is actually happening, why it's actually happening. And then there's the facts of, like, the numbers behind that thing. And so I think my role really is to tell the truth and to find the truth in, I guess, the facts. And I think that the pursuit of journalism or impartiality is more about the spirit with which you do kind of journalism, trying to be almost unaligned to the end goal. So, for example, certainly in my book, I would say that I critique things and movements that I care about and I think are important, but they still require critique. There's critiques of, I guess, individuals who I might even like, but it's because I feel like that's important. And I think that a part of doing journalism in many ways is like you have to be prepared to have no friends. You have to be very much prepared just to like piss people off if you're in pursuit of the truth.
And sorry to cut you, does that pierce into black culture and the black community, i.e. you might have to tell some home truths about your own people
Absolutely.
that actually
Absolutely.
ideally wouldn't want to reveal, but because you're a journalist, that first and foremost is what you got to do.
Yeah, I agree with that within reason. There's a certain type of person I think who doesn't quite maybe understand maybe black life, and maybe they can be more hostile with what it is that they say. We're telling the truth about this community, but actually that truth is missing some nuance. But I think that in terms of being able to report on things and critique things, even in the community that you're in, I think that is important. Because the irony, the end goal is supposed to be kind of, I guess, a correction of the issues that you're highlighting are not quite working or they're kind of wrong. It's a problem because you want that to be recognised. So no, I think that part of journalism is just like being prepared to piss people off, but being provocative, not overly provocative for performance sake. And I think that in broadcast there is a lot of performance. It's television as well. It's like you're going to go and doorstep somebody, they're not going to answer the question, but there you are shouting questions. And then there is a performance element to it as well. But, I think that fundamentally, you're writing the kind of, I guess, to be cliched, I don't know, first draft of history. So it's important to try and find the truth of what a thing is.
How has journalism for you changed from when you entered it to where it is now? And where do you see journalism going in the next 8 to 10, 15 years?
I think now a lot of journalism, I think that a lot of the trends that exist now had already started 8 years ago. And I guess that's like far more kind of influences people who are not necessarily trained or even, I guess, even engaging more critically with how it is that they curate and present and verify information and discourse, now becoming more actively prominent in the dissemination of news and information and discourse and journalism-based content, to use that word. So I think right now it's a very kind of congested space, and I think that lots of people are engaging in publishing material, but without necessarily going through the process of self-scrutiny and verification that we do in our day-to-day lives. Obviously, when you put out a broadcast on TV, there's a whole process regulated by Ofcom, all manner of things that go into just making sure that you have pursued this story with, if not rigor, then certainly, the saying, integrity and accuracy. And that you're not putting out anything that is wrong or misleading. And not to say that people who work in mainstream media don't get it wrong, like they get it wrong all the time, but it's that there is a process, but actually the majority of people who publish now don't go through anywhere near that process. And I think that has created a bit of a wild west in terms of discourse and in terms of truth itself, in whatever it is, just becoming kind of irrelevant and secondary to just content. And I think that the sheer number of actors now is significantly higher than 8 years ago.
When you used the word content the first time about a minute ago, and you kind of emphasised the word content, and you almost did air quotation marks, I think the word is the word content almost the difference in the problem, in that it's kind of got a negative connotation. Content is seen as something you just put out because you want to grow your numbers or grow your brand, and that is diluted what journalism actually is.
I don't see journalism as content. It's funny because sometimes I might post some videos from TV News Report on Instagram or whatever. And some people are like, "Oh, I love your content." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 buddy, slow down. This ain't content."
And is that the issue? People blur the line between content and journalism.
I mean, if we're being crude, it's like media content, right? So, but I think for me, it's the idea of what a thing is. Journalism is rolls with a level of truth finding and fact finding and news gathering, and there's a whole process that goes into that, in my opinion. Content has a slightly different ambition. As, I guess, ideological ideas, the ideological idea of content and the ideological idea of journalism. Of course, if you put it on TV or it's in its raw form, it is a format and therefore it's content. But in terms of the motivations behind them, I think that there's a difference. Or that's what I would say as a journalist who maybe the space is becoming more, I don't know, competitive or whatever. Maybe we're just pole clutching. No, won't somebody think of the journalism? But no, I do.
To get over ourselves a little bit.
But no, you know what? No, I think that certainly in my book, I look at, to some extent, the misinformation and untruths that develop by people effectively chasing, I guess, clicks and growth and a media persona. And the truth is that I'm not personally interested in celebrity. For the most part, my Instagram was like private before I had my book out and I had something to sell. I try to dial down a lot of my use on Twitter. But I think that micro celebrity and the possibilities of that online have enabled people who are aggregating and sharing and disseminating any idea that appeals to a particular bias of a community to obviously build up. And the Sun and tabloids have always done that, but now the sheer magnitude of people who are doing that now creates a kind of industrialization, I guess, of bad faith.
So okay, don't worry. You're doing that thing in interviews that people often do when they're selling something, that they're conscious of the time and they want to get their plug in for their product before they run out of time. We're gonna get to the book. Don't worry.
I wasn't even doing that, because if I was doing that, I would have said buy, get rich, or try and get it all goods to bookstores. I got two more questions. I would have said that. So don't worry. I wasn't even plugging the book there.
We've got two more questions before we get to the book. First one is, have you ever done a story, Symeon, that has made you cry?
Listen, you didn't say we're going to get vulnerable in this podcast. If that's the case, I would have asked for a fee.
Come on, man.
But
honestly, that coming that coming for charge.
Yeah, exploiting people's emotions for content, manipulative behaviour. What is going on here?
I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, I've done stories that made me somewhat emotional. The thing is,
I'm not emotional. Cry.
Yeah, maybe.
What was the story?
I'm trying to think. I don't want to misrepresent the reality. I think there was some heartbreaking stories. I remember I interviewed a family who lost a son to a knife crime, and they were just like really amazing, close knit family, like super close, and then they were just sharing the loss. He was even was he a twin? I think he was a twin. And then they just had this hole in the family picture, like literally. Yeah, they were talking about that. That was very, very emotional. What else? I mean, yeah, I think I've definitely done some emotionally provocative stories. And there was another one as well that I can recall the feeling, but I can't quite recall the story. I wonder what that was. Maybe it'll come back to me. I think it's important to hear, for people listening, to hear that journalists, do stories. It's very rare in my field of sport where I do a story that makes me cry or emotional. I've got emotional about other people's stories, but I think it's important that people hear that journalists aren't monsters. You mean you weren't crying when Arsene Wenger left Arsenal?
Listen, I was crying with the tears of joy, Brethren, and you were there at the time, so we both remember that. At the point of recording, we are a few weeks ahead of this year's BAFTAs. You were editor for Channel 4's Back to Front day, the Channel 4 episode that day. So when this comes out, hopefully, if you're listening to right now, you're a BAFTA award-winning editor. Because we don't know the result of that at this point. How seminal a moment was that for you, the program, and the industry?
Black to Front? Or Black to Front, our news program?
The news program, sorry.
How much of what, the initiative as well, we're talking?
I guess initiative, yeah.
Let me think. How seminal a moment was it?
I mean, was it a seminal moment, first of all? Let's start with that.
The thing is, you have to remember, right? There's a lot of history. Problem in this country is that we are in a constant state of amnesia, where we literally just forget everything that happens. Like Channel 4 has a history of specialising in minority-based programs.
So to add context, people don't know, sorry, just a bit of context. Channel 4 did last year.
So there was another day called Black to Front, and the idea was to have everybody who was on screen that day, regardless of it was advert, was to be black, and it was to highlight the absence of black people in, I guess, television. There's a nuance to that in the reality that I would argue that black people are very much overrepresented in the imagination of the public because we're so prominent in dominant areas of pop culture, whether that's music and sport. But we're actually absent in positions of power in elite industries, whether that's finance, whether that's media. Who is the most senior black person at Channel 4, including the news? Who's the most senior black person at the BBC? I mean, we're few and far between despite our prominence in the public's imagination. And so the inequality is really over power and resource and distribution as opposed to visibility. So there's irony there. It's interesting. Anyway, so the day was supposed to, I guess, look at where there were an absence of kind of black talent, I guess, theoretically, where we work. Certainly, I can't think of any black senior editorial figures, and I can't think of them as editors or deputy editors or commissioners. I can't think of them. I haven't seen them in the building. So I guess it was that level where, interestingly enough, some of the highlights of absence was, but of course, if you're watching the programs, you see Mo Gilligan, or you see Kevin, you see people who are all on screen and who are visible and so forth. And so then the question then is that if you have this day where everybody on screen is going to be black to highlight this inequality, what does the news look like? Is it just the regular news with regular black faces? My thought was like, that's boring. Like, we already do this anyway. We already kind of cover the news if you're a black reporter or whatever. I'm not interested in that. So if that's what they want, cool, I'm booking my annual leave now. But I was like, you know what? Actually, I'd rather use this day as an opportunity to create a program which, for me, can capture the zeitgeist. And if you watch this program in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, it gave you a sense of what this year, this era was like. What were the issues? What was the conversation? What was the mark on I guess, Britain, but from a black editorial perspective? And so for me, it was about creating a program that was seminal in its own right outside of the kind of Black to Front initiative, which largely, I think, was a success in terms of what was produced. And then it highlighted that there is a lot of talent, but we knew there was talent. And the talent, ironically, is kind of thriving in the independent sector, I guess in the influencer sector. It's thriving in those spheres, and in many ways, it's the success of those realms which TV is desperate to capture for its own survival. And so, it's who was really the one seeking opportunities is a good question to ask, but that's enough for us, one for another day. But anyway, so it was about kind of creating that. That was always what I wanted to do with the program. And so even in the program, there's a trajectory in which it's like Britain past, starting with Britain's kind of past, but through an active conversation around the Benny Bronzes. Then the middle was like the Black elite and what they tell us about this moment. And then the last piece was like Britain's future, the kind of fall of the Union with, I guess, the massive cleavages that are taking place and falling along the lines of nationalism, but also kind of future questions over who this country is and the cleavages that exist, and obviously Scotland want their independence and we've left the European Union. So it was that was effectively the idea at the heart of the program, but from a black kind of perspective. And I think that obviously it was well received, created huge kind of headlines, just the stories themselves. So I think that the program itself was seminal, and that you can watch it in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. Even now, you watch it back and it still feels quite present. Do you know what I'm saying? And that was really the ambition, to kind of transcend news and capture the zeitgeist, which is what I think news and journalism is supposed to do. Back to Front is an interesting one. I read, I was reading, I guess, the first draft of a kind of history book, particularly about black gay activists in South London, by a writer called Jason Okende. And it's interesting where he was talking about some of the programming that was coming out in the 80s, recording kind of black life and things of this nature on Channel 4, which obviously had a very particular remit and has a particular history. And so Black to Front as a thing, for me, is like kind of, it's a part of a tradition of what a broadcaster like Channel 4 was set up to kind of do and address and be alternative and engage with that and stuff like that. So even when it is presented as something that's quite wild, I would say it's actually in keeping. It's actually in keeping with that. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It was an interesting. It was an interesting program. I guess people have critiqued it for kind of being tokenistic or whatever.
Well, I guess the proof's going to be in the pudding going forward now, if it was tokenistic or if actually it was a start of something.
There you go.
I just want to say, the kids say, give you your flowers or whatever, give you your dues. And Serena, who's in the room producing this podcast, also worked on that. Everyone else that worked on that program. I watched it and I was so proud. I actually didn't get a chance to be on it because I was in Tokyo for the Paralympics. And
you were like, but listen, Tokyo, I don't need this.
I wanted to work on it. No, I wanted to work on it. I had some big things coming, but I got called elsewhere. But I watched it and I thought to myself, this isn't just a black news program with black people. This actually could stand alongside any news program. And the variety was dope. There was a sports story. I think Zara did Emirati Khan.
Yeah.
There was you did the program in Bristol at was it a museum?
No, it was basically at the Bristol Beacon, which used to be called the Coasted Hall.
There you
go. Which was named after the man the statue was dragged into.
That's right.
There
was a dope film done by Kemi in Nigeria. There was a you broke a story on the royal family. It was a news program that was just dope. It just happened to have all black people working on it, and I just watched it and thought, this is it's exciting. It's varied. I think Aisha and Kemi presented it really well. It was just a really good program. So I want to say to yourself, Toby, and all the team, you should be very, very proud. I hope people are hearing this podcast right now. You are BAFTA award winners. I think you guys deserve it.
I think the likelihood is that ITV will be collecting their
possibly
a millionth gong of the year,
possibly, but irrespective.
But we'll take it. We'll take the nomination and get to go to the party.
Indeed. I know you got to go, so I want to just get to the book now. So that is probably the single biggest thing in your life at the moment. You're giving me a look. Is that not a fair?
I mean, it's taking up a lot of time, even though it's published now. But
so the book is about. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've got the book and I've started reading the book. I think about 10 or so, maybe less pages in.
Is that it?
I only kind of got to it. I'm a slow reader, and I got reading to it. Where are we now? Today is Monday. Started on Thursday. It's about the influencer economy and how people in the last decade have used social media as a currency for growth in their own personal or business world. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean, every time someone asks the question, I answer the question differently. But it's like
brilliant.
I mean, really, this is a book for me which is about...
What's it called, first of all? Tell the people what it's called.
It's called Get Rich or Lie Trying, Ambition and Deceit in the New Influence Economy. Really, this is a book about modern work and about, I guess, the post-millennial generation who are growing up in a world where they have huge ambitions, of being told that, all you have to do is go to university, get education, and you can achieve the trappings of middle-class life, but how the actual economic consensus has shifted against them for very different reasons. Certainly post-financial crash in terms of real wages for graduate labour is down, housing is up, you can't own unless you come from kind of effectively wealth in major cities. And what it means then to achieve this completely this completely unattainable sense of what you should be achieving. And we always talk about things like imposter syndrome, but there's just a huge amount of pressure that young people are under. When I say young now, even under 40, just to be a success, whatever that means, because of all the things that we're exposed to and tapped into online and on socials. A lot of it being kind of a mirage, and then how basically social media has stepped in to promise to fill that void, but actually how there's a darker side to that, and how actually the majority of people who are supposedly influencers or basically digital workers, actually how they're more likely to be exploited, fall into pyramid schemes, or some cases have the worst parts of that ecosystem effectively just take advantage of them. And that's even before you get to that fraud. And then I put that in the context of, I guess, this kind of moment in which there is like a real gold rush among investors in Silicon Valley to kind of invest supposedly in like the next big startup and talent, but how that world, which arguably some people believe works by the rules of a kind of Ponzi scheme or pyramid scheme, how that world is actually closed to the majority of people. And so everybody else now, they basically got to hustle on these platforms, and what that really looks like, and then what's that really costing us. And so the book is kind of like quite an easy... Some people who have read it, critics have said it's got like a TV documentary style vibe. I would say that is inaccurate. I'd say. Yeah, it's quite an easy book to read.
And I think with social media influencers, we're seeing how that can propel people to become stars and cross over to TV, and there's examples of that.
Yeah.
I guess the downside, because I came to your book launch, I wanted to ask the question, but I didn't get a chance. One of the downsides, I think, to social media generally is an example that I think we all saw recently with the passing of Jamal Edwards, and the evening that it was going around that he had passed. Everybody seemed to want to be the first person to kind of break the news that Jamal Edwards had died. And I think that links to the social currency of, if I get this out first, I'm going to get the most amount of likes, retweets, and social currency.
The irony of that is I agree and I disagree.
Go on.
I believe that there was, with any kind of news, right, especially on Twitter, there is an element of, I want to have the fire tweet. I want to have the fire tweet that does the numbers and, propels me on this site. The incentives, the rewards that drive it. In many ways, the people who I felt were most driven by that were actually the people who were critiquing that notion and then say, you people are awful, how can you share this before Brenda Edwards? But a lot of the kind of people who were sharing it beforehand, I didn't get the sense
that was their motive.
That was their motive. It was more like, wow, this is shocking. Is this true? What's this news? And although people shared that without maybe a lack of consideration, that actually let's just wait and listen. The way that a lot of those accounts were using social media, in many ways, it's not with themselves as a media brand. And so it was many of the people who were influencers and were using it as media brands who were then writing these tweets, you people are awful about what you said about revealing this news. But they were saying they're tweeting this before his mum revealed the news. So if you really believe that, then why are you even talking? Just wait for the news to be confirmed, and then maybe you can say that. So for me, it was classic kind of, it was classic Twitter, by which people who are keen to present themselves as the voice of moral authority are actually the ones driven by the warped incentives. And you know what I mean, the thing is, there's two elements to it. We all use these apps to communicate, and so they're a central or primary partner of human culture, even down to people meeting their partners or whatever, where they kind of congregate, sharing of news information. So there is that aspect to it, and then there's the industry that then propels people into micro celebrity, and then they use it and then they grow, and then the rewards of that and the possibilities of that, and then that becomes a form of work in itself.
What was the biggest thing you learned from writing this book? What was the thing you, in researching the book, writing the book, that you didn't know before you started writing the book?
You have to read the book, because it's like the book is, in many ways, a lot of books by the internet can be quite dry, and it's about kind of getting all these like random facts, and you put it in like, did you know that this company made this money from this, and did you know? But the book is really about people online trying to achieve their ambitions on the internet and failing, or that costing them a lot, or being exploited, or pyramid schemes. And so in many ways, it's about the inhumanity of this form of modern work in some cases. So, you know, I interviewed a man who makes an income being paid to be racially abused, for example. So you know, his followers who come from kind of alt-right parts of the community will pay him $5, $10 to call him the N-word. And then I speak to him, how did he get here? And he speaks about being homeless and living on Skid Row and all these kind of things. And, you know, why this form of work, why he does it, and how it compares to the other form of work. And then it's like, then you're engaging with influencers on OnlyFans. Then you're engaging with all these different types of kind of influencers who we don't think of as influencers. Like the whole crypto scene and NFTs, people think of that as some financial wizardry. It's just influencer hype. It's an influencer-led economy, primarily about building hype around these things so that people invest in them, so that you see a transfer of wealth from late adopters to early adopters. That's all it is. It's pure influencer culture. And so it's like, it's not like, oh, we find this great company and, you know, in 10 years' time, it's going to be producing 60% of our electricity. Invest in it now because it's going to be so significant, and you want to put money into that company growing. It's like, hi, I'm this influencer. This is really cool. You should own it. Your value might go up. It doesn't really do anything, but, you know, everyone's going to be getting involved in it. So, you know, be a part of it. It's just pure hype and speculation. And so that is a world. So it's I guess it's about, what does value look like? What does meaning look like? And it's asking these kind of questions, not necessarily answering it, but just posing it via these people's stories. And so in that sense, it does have a documentary kind of vibe.
Okay.
And all the other little nuggets and facts that I picked up along the way, I sprinkled in there. So I would say,
where can people buy the book? Is it all bookshops,
everywhere,
online, all that?
I would say you're most likely to see it in Waterstones or foils. A Waterstones or a foils, I would say.
This is a podcast that I want to be, I guess, aspirational for listeners. I want them to kind of, really, those that want to penetrate one of the three areas we're focusing on: journalism, sports, and music. Where obviously journalism and media. What would be your advice to somebody who is looking to enter journalism/media in 2022? Because I think the way that you would enter journalism 10, 15 years ago is maybe different to now. What would your advice to be to a young person, or in fact anyone that's like, I want to be a writer, I want to be a journalist? Yeah. What would be your advice?
If you want to be a writer, go and read books. A lot of people want to go and write, but they don't even read. They don't know what is out there. And that is always a red flag to me if you want to write, but you don't read. So go and read. If you want to be a journalist, I think it's actually been the same, right?
Similar.
Lots of people want to curate media identities, and then that creates opportunities and work in a platform. And, you know, that is a route. But really, if you want to be a journalist where you're driven primarily by story, then you just got to go and, you always have stories to go and sell. You basically sell stories and trade access. That's basically it. You find something that's interesting, you get the access, then you trade it and you sell it. That's really, in its pure form, what will always give you an avenue into the place, and then from there you go. So I think that's key. And I think a lot of minorities, interestingly enough, when they especially when they come from non-traditional backgrounds, they haven't been to particular grammar school or private school or Oxbridge or whatever. It's like, and they don't kind of meet what the industry says a talented person looks like. It's usually an event or an avenue where suddenly the newsroom looks at itself and says, we don't have somebody who can go and get this person or knows this person who can do that. And then they're brought in. And so when I think of some of the people who I know who are definitely from non-traditional backgrounds, they came in, for example, when the dominant story maybe was the story when the big concerns around Islam and jihad and all these kind of things, they were trying to find people like that nature and had those kind of connections. Huge influx then of I guess, non-traditional journalists suddenly given space in newsrooms. And then when that story changes, you're present, so you've got that experience. Likewise, when there's riots, suddenly there's loads of black journalists. And I remember Gary Young saying, I think, that was an opportunity for him. Maybe that was Stephen Lawrence. It was either Stephen Lawrence or it was the 85 riots being an avenue for him. And I think that was also, in my experience, certainly post 2011 riots. So I think that it's the access and the stories, having those things always to trade and effectively to do journalism around. I think that's a thing, but it doesn't have to be so linked to identity either. Your identity, if you are interested in niche things, then those are things that you can always pitch. And I think it's better to do that. It's better to have something to sell and trade than to be like, oh, can I have experience? Everybody wants experience, but it's like if you have something, then that's a bargaining.
What you bring to the table, indeed. The future of journalism. That's a quote, Symeon Brown. And BAFTA award winner. I'm going to put it out there. I'm putting
so what are you going to do now when ITV win and you got a podcast to put out?
Well, I'm putting it out there. I'm putting it out there.
What are you going to do, yeah? BAFTA nominee.
Listen, we can do an edit. Come on, Serena. We can do a little remix. Future of journalism. That was a quote from Jon Snow. I thought that was powerful. I love that. What was your reaction when you heard him say that?
Jon Snow? Was my reaction. It was like, John's good for a quote. Thank you, John. I can use this now. Thank you. I can eat.
I can pay some bills.
I can pay bills now. Thank you, John. I'm gonna be living on this for the next 30 years. I'm gonna be 50 years old saying John said I was the future.
Listen, Symeon Brown, love, big up. Thank you.